African perspective.
And coming up in your sports news this hour, Rwanda's sports minister has urged African nations to invest more heavily in sports, while World Athletics have discovered corporate theft worth millions of US dollars. I'll have details of these and other stories at the bottom of the hour.
Connecting Africa to the world. Africa in Business with Tami Ngubeni brings you the latest insights on Africa's economy.
A very good Friday to you, Africa. Here's what we've got on your agenda this afternoon on Africa in Business. In just a short while, we'll be hosting Victor Kgomoeswana, author of Africa is Open for Business, as we look at some of the leading stories on the African continent, including developments in Kenya, Ethiopia, as well as Zimbabwe. A little bit later on in the show, we'll look at the $30 billion. Yes, that's the amount. It's an amount that's been set aside by the African Union in order to prop up and redevelop an ailing and really fragile aviation system on the African continent. And also the Association of Private Security Owners of South Africa says that systemic criminality, corruption and gross governance failures are crippling the private security sector provident fund. We'll delve deeper into that a little bit later on this afternoon. But we begin here with Mozambique's President Daniel Chapo. He says his government may raise counter arguments to the revised budget and schedule submitted by Total Energies. We'll bring you that story in just a moment. For now, it is exactly 10 minutes after 4 p.m.
Africa means business. Tune into Africa in Business with Tami Ngubeni for the future of the African economy. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
It is exactly 10 minutes after 6 o'clock. Our first stop this afternoon, our conversation, which we have every single week with Victor Kgomoeswana, author of Africa is Open for Business and Africa Bounces Back. Victor is also the Executive Director for Marketing and Communication at the University of Limpopo. A very good Friday afternoon to you, Victor.
Good afternoon, Tami. Good to talk to you again.
Well, I tell you what, one person who's certainly having more than a good afternoon, but certainly looks like a good season, a good season for him, is Strive Masiyiwa, Zimbabwe's wealthiest individual.
He has earned it. He has earned every dollar. His net worth, according to Forbes' real-time net worth survey or report, at $1.3 billion. He is the first dollar billionaire in Zimbabwe and one of the few dollar billionaires in Africa. If you look him up, it will say Zimbabwean British. You know, he lives in London, he lives in South Africa, he's everywhere. The owner of 33% of Econet Wireless, which is where the root of his wealth came, and then, of course, what used to be called EcoCash Holdings, now TV and Cybertech, he owns 33% of that as well. The Cassava Technologies investment with NVIDIA is the reason behind this, because there's going to be about $720 million invested to build AI factories in partnership with NVIDIA, and that's a revolutionary move, and that's why investors are showing so much confidence in his ventures, because they understand he's building factories. This is not just downloading information or mining AI from elsewhere. He's saying, let's build our own in Africa. I mean, this is something groundbreaking in the real sense of the word. But because of the fourth industrial revolution we keep talking about, this is the kind of investment that's going to make you a dollar billionaire, even if you had not been before.
I tell you what, Victor, technology is certainly on the forefront of these developments, and so many, millionaires, billionaires emerging from technology around the world.
Definitely, and although there's still room for property, because when you build these technologies on land, you need buildings, but technology is just that level. Once you've made the investment, the returns are exponential, and that's why when you have the command of the industry the way he does, if he didn't have the background in Econet Wireless, they might think, who is he? But this man built a business when President Mugabe was still in charge of Zimbabwe. He had a hard time building building his business. He had to run from Zimbabwe and base himself elsewhere. So he's just that tenacious, and that's why he has the respect of the market. But net worth up by $100 million in less than a year, that's quite something.
I mean, as you say, he certainly has earned every single dollar of that. So taking a look now at BRICS, it really has gone now beyond just rhetoric. There's been talk around the de-dollarization process. That looks like it's now actually really moving forward.
Since I'm moving, and in Moscow, they call it the Moscow Pact. There were all these BRICS members, including the new ones, the Irans, the Saudi Arabia, these new members that joined, now that we call it BRICS Plus. It's a creation of a multipolar world, which I think is fair, Tammy. The world is not just the West and the East. The Cold War has long ended. And you no longer a bipolar world where you are either with the West or the USSR. Russia is in there, but so is Brazil, and so is China and India. You no longer can afford to be just living your life. Are you communist? Are you capitalist? So the fact that the dollar is still commanding so much of the world trade is not fair, because it creates an injustice, an economic injustice against the countries that are not dollar denominated. But what they are saying is, let's at least create other options. If you are you look at a country like Mali, which has thrown out or frozen the assets of the Canadian company Barrick, and is now freezing some of the assets or licenses of companies like Harmony because they say they are not compliant. On the other hand, they are opening a lot of petrol or diesel, fuel supplies from Russia. Why should you, when you have no business with the U.S., you have no business with France, you are doing business with Russia, you'll be looking for dollars to settle the bill? I'm sure that doesn't make sense, because a currency is the language of trade. So if you're trading with Russia and you're Mali or you're Ethiopia, why do you need the U.S. dollar? And don't forget, the U.S. dollar became as powerful as it is because Americans persuaded African countries, among others, to drop the gold standard. Countries used to store gold as a way of backing up their currency and maintaining the stability. So I think it's time that we get the multipolar. The dollar will always play a role for a long time still, but it cannot be the only currency. And I think BRICS is the indication that the power shift has started, and the world is no longer going to be what it used to be. It's multipolar, and let's work. Let's see that multilateralism in the currency markets as well.
And this is precisely what Donald Trump was not wanting, and this is precisely what he's been trying to avoid.
Yeah, Donald Trump needs some love from his parents. I'm sorry, he cannot be missing what is so obvious. These trends, Danny, people like myself who have been in consulting, we were talking about them 20 years ago, 30 years ago. We were already indicating that the power shift is moving. The day in 1990, I don't know if you remember, when the Berlin Wall fell, we already knew that the world is moving in an opposite direction. We knew that the USSR had been dismantled. There was not going to be a war between US and Moscow. So the day the Berlin Wall fell, everything stopped being about, are you with the U.S. or are you with the USSR? Now, if Donald Trump in 2025 still misses that point, he is showing a lack of understanding of the world around him. It's a pity he's the most powerful president in the world still.
And I want to move on because there's quite a bit to touch on. But your thoughts, what then will underlie the value of currency moving forward and into the dollarized and dollar-based economy? What then is going to underscore the value?
No, you remember, Tammy, we talk about the Zimbabwe's gold-backed currency. There are countries that are going back to the gold standard in their own way. Zimbabwe has started, and African countries have to start understanding you cannot be having so much in mineral wealth underground, and yet you want your currency to be hinged on the dollar. You should be able to use the resources that you have. At the moment, many resource-rich countries still will have gold underground, but they'll still be controlled by the value of the gold that is stored in the Bank of England. That's not right. So the justice that I'm talking about is just that equity that allows everybody to have value. If you think of the barter system.
It sounds it's a reset. It's
Yeah,
pretty
it's a
much
reset,
it's a
definitely.
reset. So let's
It's a rethink. It's a rethink. That's why you cannot be stiff like old Donald and just say we must still be feared. Nobody has to fear anybody. You must reset and say multilateralism is here to stay. If I'm going to be powerful, I'm going to be powerful because I am working with the rest of the world. I'm not dominating them. I'm collaborating. So people call it competition plus cooperation together. Coopetition. The business people like to use that word, coopetition.
I must say, Victor Khomosana, thank you so much. Some really engaging developments on the African continent this week. We look forward to another update come next week, same time, same place.
Have a good weekend, Tammy.
Thank you. That's Victor Khomosana, author of Africa is Open for Business and Africa Bounces Back. He's also the Executive Director for Marketing and Communications at the University of Limpopo. One huge development as well this week is Ethiopian Airlines. They have begun their second daily flight, and this is on the Abuja-Addis Ababa route. And thinking of just how, profitable Ethiopian Airlines has been and how popular Nigeria is as both the business and tourist destination, it only makes sense. And I guess one can only ask, why did it take so long? But certainly that Abuja-Addis Ababa route on the way, as far as Ethiopian Airlines is concerned, takes us to 19 minutes after 4 p.m.
From markets to innovation. From markets to innovation. Africa in Business with Tami Ngubeni covers it all. With Africa's future in focus, Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Now, Mozambique President Daniel Chapo says his government may raise counter-arguments to the revised budget and schedule that was submitted by Total Energies. This is for the liquefied natural gas project that it leads in the country. The French energy giant informed Mozambique's president last week that the Mozambique's LNG consortium now estimates that project costs have increased by $4.5 billion during the 4-year suspension that followed an Islamist militant attack in the year 2021. Channel Africa's economics reporter Innocent Simosa has the details.
Total Energies and its partners want the development and production period extended by 10 years as partial compensation. Looking at cost implications, but how might the proposed $4.5 billion increase in project costs affect Mozambique's projected revenues and broader economic benefits from the LNG project? Dr. Wilker Diaz shares his perspective.
So that proposal to increase the project costs is not a very good signal for Mozambique because that means less tax revenues, less profits for our state, and maybe the government need to change the projects, the priority projects for the next times. And right now, it's possible to say we don't have enough money to give the tax revenues what we agree in the past.
On contract extension, from an economic and policy standpoint, Dr. Diaz shares some of the potential risks and benefits for Mozambique if it agrees to Total Energies' request to extend the development and production period by 10 years.
About the contract extension, I think Mozambique will be more dependent of the gas project, the gas tax revenues, the profits from the gas, and that is not great, or that's not good for one economy. We need to development be dependent only on one sector. And I think in other part we have some benefits on that, because if the government play one good game on that time, maybe he'll be one. It will be a tactic we can use from one tactic to try to attract more international investments to our country.
He adds that the upside of 10 years extension might help rebuild investor confidence.
Because if we extend the years, maybe we can show Mozambique state it's one state who the international investor we can trust on that country. So that is the reason sometimes it's a good thing when we have some type of the
Given the government's indication of possible counter-arguments, he believes Mozambique lacks strong negotiating leverage against Total Energies to effectively safeguard national interest such as job creation, local content, and revenue sharing.
I think right now, at this moment, Mozambique don't have a very big power to negotiate it, the contract of the LNG process for now. Because we have so many reasons. We have the terrorism attack, we have the social problems affect our economy. So maybe the Total have more power to negotiate it than the government. But Mozambique have a very big team or diplomatic team. But I think will depend also to the political will. So that is the other very good thing, because sometimes the interestings of the political party in power.
As discussions between the Mozambican government and Total Energies continue, the outcome will be closely watched for its impact on the country's energy, ambitions, and economic future. For Channel Africa News, I'm Innocent Samos in Johannesburg.
Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
It is exactly 24 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African time. This is Africa in Business on Channel Africa. Now, Standard Bank Angola has obtained approval to open a correspondent account with JP Morgan, the biggest bank in the world by market capitalization. The bank is the first Angolan bank to obtain authorization, marking the re-entry of JP Morgan into the national financial system. Standard Bank says its partnership with the American multinational bank will improve access to global currencies and enable more efficient cross-border settlements while enhancing the competitiveness of the companies operating in and with the southwestern African country. For more on this, we joined this afternoon by Brem Peters, Head of Transaction Banking, Financial Institutions, Bank Sector at Standard Bank Corporate and Investment Banking, CIB. A very good afternoon to you. Welcome to Africa in Business, Brem.
Good afternoon, Tammy. Thank you, and good afternoon to your listeners too.
So this is a huge achievement, one that cannot be, overstated. But what does Angola's reintegration into the global financial system mean for the country?
Thanks, Tommy. Angola was actually still integrated into the global financial system, prior to JP Morgan offering US dollar clearing services. However, they were more peripheral players, more expensive players. So really what this means now is, you get a big global bank, a very big, it's actually the largest bank in the world by market capitalization, with all the excellent research and development budgets, with all the kind of best, most efficient, US dollar clearing systems, processes, technology, that's able now to provide a far more cost-effective, dollar clearing service for Standard Bank in Angola. And I think what this also does is it paves the way for many other global financial institutions to follow the lead. And one of the things that's critically important, and with Standard Bank really having a responsibility on the African continent to drive financial integration and global financial integration at that, is we often preach the cause of Africa. So, for example, what we do is we visit, we embark on an annual trip, international trip, where we visit all the kind of global banks, the main hard currency correspondent banks, and we discussed, matters like risk and compliance that is really required from these global banks to provide these services, and we provide them the confidence that the African continent and the banks in the African continent, especially like ourselves and many others, do actually have the right risk protocols in place, adherence to the right regulatory compliance, in order for these international financial institutions to provide these kind of services, not only in Angola, but all across Africa.
And we'll touch on that in just a moment. But if you could highlight how this approval opens, to open rather a correspondent account, enhance your ability to serve multinational, corporate as well as institutional clients in Angola. And then at the tail end of that, just if you could touch on that last statement about how this aids you as Standard Bank in fulfilling your broader purpose of connecting African markets to international financial ecosystems.
No, with pleasure, Tammy. So essentially, when you don't have big financial institutions providing, dollar clearing or euro clearing or sterling or Chinese currency, etc., what happens is you have smaller players that are generally kind of they don't have the right economies of scale, they don't have the same systems and processes, and they essentially are less efficient and more costly. So what happens here is now you create a much more cost-effective financial integration for Angola in this example or this case. That then actually, opens up the services far more efficiently to not just, big multinationals, but also to, smaller, man in the streets, providing remittances. For example, people that are possibly working in the Middle East that are remitting back to Angola. It's a more cost-effective way of then sending currency home, or you have someone in Angola needing to import goods and services. They need to pay dollars, and it's far cheaper than by doing it through big financial institutions. Not only cheaper, remember, banking and money is a very serious matter, so it's incredibly important for it to be secure. And then, of course, we have the governments and the regulators, the central banks that need to make sure that everything is compliant. Exchange controls and many different matters like that are being adhered to. And by having, two large, credible, trustworthy financial institutions like JP Morgan and like Standard Bank providing this kind of service, it provides a lot of confidence into the market that this is done cost effectively, but also safely.
Well, we wish you all the best with that, as well as the developments that will come in the back of this authorization. We thank you for your time, Mr. Brem Peters.
Thank you, Tammy.
Thank you, sir. He is the head of transaction banking, financial institutions for the banking sector at Standard Bank Corporate and Investment Banking. That's Standard Bank CIB. He brings us to exactly 4:30 p.m. Central African time as we take a look now at the latest from the market indicators with Buntle Hedbosch.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thanks, Tammy. Good afternoon. In our final look at the indicators this afternoon, $1 is trading at 17 Rand 24 cents in South Africa. In Botswana, it's trading at 13 Pula 66. In Namibia, it's at 17 Namibian dollars 24. The Zambian kwacha is trading at 22 kwacha. In Kenya, the dollar is trading at 128 shilling 34. In Ethiopia, 152 birr 80. Uganda, 3,454 shilling. And in Tanzania, it's at 2,454 shilling. $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,449 naira this afternoon. In Egypt, the dollar is trading at 47 Egyptian pound 21. In Tunisia, it's trading at 2 dinar 92. In Algeria, at 129 dinar 54. In Morocco, the dollar will cost you 9 dirham 21. In Angola, it's trading at 912 kwanza, while the Congolese franc is trading at 2,206 to the US dollar. And now looking at commodities, gold is trading at $4,017 per ounce this afternoon. It's inched up a bit. And platinum at $1,577 per ounce, while Brent crude oil is also slightly higher at $64.77 a barrel. And those are your indicators. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or give us a call on +2711 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I am Buntle Hedbosch.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
And for the latest from the business of sport, a very good Friday afternoon to you, Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thank you so much, Tammy. A very good afternoon from the Sports Desk. We'll start with the story. So Rwanda's sports minister has urged African nations to invest more heavily in sports, warning that the continent is falling far behind in tapping into the global sports economy. Now, speaking at the recently concluded Sports Biz Africa Forum 2025 in Kigali, Minister Nelly Mukazairi said Africa's contribution to the world's sport market stands at just 0.5% compared to the 2.5% in other regions. Now, Minister Mukuzugari described sports as more than just entertainment, calling it a driver of economic growth as well as social unity. She said Rwanda's own investments in stadiums as well as training facilities had already demonstrated tangible results.
I trust that the conversations initiated here last year were followed by concrete actions, hence all of us meeting again here. And we're again going to deepen collaboration, explore new avenues to further advance the development of African and sport in our continent. The global sport industry or market was valued at close to $480 billion by 2024, is expected to reach more than $630 billion in 2028. That is only in 3 years.
Now, the minister also pointed to limited infrastructure as well as low levels of private investment as key barriers to growth, saying investors should see Africa as an untapped opportunity.
Some of the challenges that we must all know or that we know, which will be part of our discussions and beyond, is that we still have challenge like inadequate financing in sport industry. Limited expertise is also one of that, and also major infrastructure gap. These are some of the challenges and areas that the sport industry in Africa is still facing that should be subject of our discussions and also collaboration as we address that.
Onto this story, World Athletics says it has sacked staff as well as called law enforcement after discovering corporate theft that is worth more than $1.7 million. Now, the Sports International governing body said the financial fraud carried out by two of its employees and a contracted consultant over several years was uncovered during its first annual audit under a new financial leadership team. So one of the employees had left just before the theft was discovered earlier on this year, while the other, as well as a consultant, had their contracts terminated following an internal investigation. So the sum stolen is equivalent to more than half of the $2.4 million in prize money World Athletics paid to gold medalist at the Paralympic Games, underscoring the material impact of the loss. Now, the scandal also follows the high-profile controversies in athletics, including the recent debt issues of the Startup League Grand Slam track, which left millions owed to athletes. At the same time, the detailed cases were handed over to a judicial as well as legal authorities for criminal investigation. World Athletics President Sebastian Coe said the organization was determined now to recover whatever monies were taken, should I say, and also use the full might of the law to bring those who committed the crimes to order. The governing body also said it was also set to introduce a set of enhanced internal financial controls to prevent future fraud. And finally, the International Olympic Committee as well as Saudi Arabia have ended their 12-year esports partnership after only a year parting ways to develop separate project, according to the IOC. Now, 2 years before the first Olympic esports games were to be held in Riyadh in the city of Saudi Arabia, the IOC said discussions with the Saudi Olympic as well as Paralympic Committee had ending their partnership 14 months after announcing a 12-month deal during the 2024 Paris Olympic Games. They mutually agreed that they will end their cooperation on the Olympics eSport Games. At the same time, both parties are committed now to pursuing their own esports ambitions on separate paths. And that's a wrap from the Sports Desk at the Sawa. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, remember to send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za. Alternatively, call us on +27 11714 4459. Have a great sporting weekend. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective. African enterprise meets global opportunity. Africa in business on Channel Africa.
Thank you to Onel Nzinzi and Buntle Headbush, who bring us to exactly 4:38 Central African Time. Now, South Africa's National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, NUMSA, says talks with the Automotive Manufacturers Employers Organization have stalled. This is after rejecting a proposed wage increase of 6.5% for the first year and 5% for the following 2 years. NUMSA is demanding a 9% increase for the first year and 8% for the next 2. SABC News economics reporter Katleho Lehodi reports.
The National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa has been bleeding members in various sectors and says the Section 189 process to retrench has been abused. The union has taken issue with developments at major companies such as Aspen Pharmacare, ArcelorMittal and at Ford SA. General Secretary Evan James has to approach the Labour Court.
They must not retrench any single worker, and that fixed-term contracts must be made to be permanent, and we will be filing that application today so that we can challenge the current retrenchment because it has no basis from where we are sitting. In AMSA, we already won in court. We are defending the victory of a court. Clearly, AMSA CEO Gobas does not respect the rule of law. He's been told by the court, Gobas, that he must reinstate those workers. He must go to a consultation, meaningful consultation with the union.
The union has threatened to strike in the automotive sector over a stalemate with 7 original equipment manufacturers represented by the Automobile Manufacturers Employers Organization. NUMSA started the negotiations at 9%, with the latest offer from the employer sitting at 7% for the first year and 5.5% for the following 2 years. Consumer inflation is currently sitting at just over 3%. Jim says this is rejected. The union has now obtained a certificate to strike.
What we're rejecting from employers is 7%, 5.5, 5.5. We're happy with 7% in the first year. We can live with that. But we do not agree that workers must be given 5.5, 5.5. Employers must bring that 0.5%, and we can have 7, 6, 6. We can close these negotiations with the current package that we've been able to negotiate. That's the bone of contention that we are fighting about. And it's irresponsible for employers to plunge the industry to a strike for a 1% over a period of a 3 year. This money they can pay to workers and then manage their production. They will recover this 1% over a period of a 3 year.
The original equipment manufacturers, including Toyota, VW SA, BMW SA and Mercedes-Benz, which are represented by the Automobile Manufacturers Employers Organization, employ more than 30,000 workers. NUMSA has challenged the companies to disclose their financials for transparency.
All the 7 OEMs must disclose how much money they have generated out of government incentive in the form of automotive investment scheme and the other incentives such as volume assembled location allowance. That's the first declaration we said, a disclosure they must make. We also said that the auto industry must also disclose how much money it has made out of generated credit certificate, which are used to offset duties and bring cars that are not locally assembled but are sold in the same local market.
The union also wants National Treasury to intervene, accusing some companies in the private security sector of defrauding workers by deducting money for medical insurance and pension fund, but failing to pay these amounts over to the respective service providers.
NUMSA says it is looking to action the strike certificate in the auto sector if the employer remains stagnant on the 5.5% offers in the second and third year. The union will also be looking to the courts for a favorable outcome in their retrenchments litigation. I'm Katla Gologodi for SABC News in Johannesburg.
Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
This is Africa in Business. It's on exactly 4:42 Central African Time as we turn our focus on the ailing aviation sector on the African continent. Well, the African Union, they've set to launch a $30 billion strategic plan to revive the continent's struggling aviation sector. African Union Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy, Lerato Mataboge, says aviation is pivotal as both an engine of integration and a cornerstone of Africa's economic transformation. The investment plan represents one of the most ambitious aviation infrastructure initiatives in Africa's recent history and seeks to accelerate the implementation of the Single African Air Transport Market. That's SATM or SAATM, a flagship project under the African Union's Agenda 2063. For more on this, we joined on the line by aviation analyst Phuthego Mojapele. Good to have you with us, Phuthego. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Tammy, and thank you for having me.
So let's go through that Single African Air Transport Market flagship project under the AU. Talk to us more about that and what it aims to achieve.
Well, currently in Africa, as you know, that it's quite difficult for anybody to move across the continent on the basis that there isn't a unanimous type of a setup in an aviation sector. It's very fragmented in African continent to move around the continent, in a sense that the airlines that are operating in other different countries, it's expensive to do the business or to operate in other countries. Others, when they set up an operation there, it becomes so difficult for them to repatriate the monies in those countries. SAA is one of the victims of such practices where they are not able to move the money out of the African continent into South Africa and so on. Now, what the African Union is trying to do is to amalgamate the transport system within the African continent, particularly in the aviation sector, where the trade between the countries within the African continent in aviation is controlled centrally, unlike where it is currently. And one of the things that also seeks to achieve, the African Union seeks to achieve, is to improve the infrastructure of the aviation within the African continent. As you are aware that the majority of the countries in African continent, they do not have adequate infrastructure as far as aviation is concerned. And therefore, the governments, they are not able to sponsor the improvement of the airports and so on. And that's why African Union is proposing to have this huge budget of $20 billion US dollars to assist some of the African continent countries.
So you mentioned Phuthego, some of the airports. Which regions, countries, or airports on the African continent do you expect to be the first, beneficiaries of this initiative?
I wouldn't really explicitly say these areas and these areas, because I don't really want to suggest that others, they do need support. I think it is within from SADC.
But Phuthego, let's be practical about it. The truth is there are airports, there are countries, there are regions that are underdeveloped and actually do need that support, which is perhaps the very reason why the AU has put together this fund.
Again, I'm going to try and answer your questions, not sponsoring any favor to anybody here, because I think it is important that we say this, that within the SADC as itself and some of the Eastern African continent, we are fine in that areas, but the problem is more into the West and the Central African regions. That's where you have a problem. For example, in South Africa, if you want to fly from Johannesburg going all the way to Abidjan or even going to Marrakesh up there, you need to go to Europe before you can get in there. So I think the focus should be more on those areas that are inaccessible at the moment. And we all know those areas that are inaccessible. And it should not also be a handout to those countries. It should be more on justifiable reasons. Why do we need to improve the facility in a certain country? Is there economic factors that can enhance in that area or that region? Because you can go spend money in that infrastructure. At the end of the day, viably in terms of the aviation sector, will it support the investment as far as that is concerned? It's one of those things that African Union need to look at and base their funding model on that. Much as all of us, we want to have the state-of-the-art facility in African continent, would that be able to support the business? It's one of those questions that we need to look at before we spend money. Rather, let's look at what sort of business models can be and whether they will be able to support and maintain. Because airport, you can have state-of-the-art airports, but the question is, will we be able to maintain it?
It has to be sustainable and has to make business sense as well. And I wonder how, Phuthego, the improved aviation infrastructure will contribute to the broader economic goals of the continent. If you could care to comment on that.
Yeah, African continent, it's like I said, it's fragmented, and there's quite a lot of money in the continent if we do have a stable aviation economy that can support the African economy. Because people within the African continent, they spend more money in moving in between African continent than going to Europe, even America for that matter. You would pay less to go to Europe than going into Africa. And in that case, you are basically pushing the money that should be circulating within African continent to European airlines, to European aviation. So there is enough economy in Africa. There is enough passengers that can move. We all want to move within. And also one of the biggest things that we do have in African continent is that we amongst countries within the continent, we need visas to each and every other countries that we move across. We are fortunate as South Africans because most of the countries we don't require to have visas, but other countries, that also needs to be strengthened and they need to be checked to make sure that once we start rolling out this, there is no hindrance for other airlines to be able to move the passengers across the African continent. So economically, that will make absolutely a lot of sense. There's a lot of economy happening in Africa, and it will definitely improve on that.
Phuthego Mojapele, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your commentary regarding these latest developments. A $30 billion fund, a strategic plan put together by the African Union in order to improve the aviation infrastructure and connectivity of the African countries. Thank you, Phuthego.
Thank you so much.
It takes us to exactly 10 minutes to 4 p.m. Central African Time.
AUSISA, the Association of Water and Sanitation Institution of South Africa, is a platform uniting Africa's water professionals. This November, Africa leads the conversation on water and sanitation. Join global and African AUSISA Africa and Global South Dialogue 2025 from the 9th till the 12th of November at the Emperor's Palace, Johannesburg. From policy innovation, this is where action meets collaboration for a water-secure future. Register today at ausisa-watersan-dialogue.org or follow at AUSISA on social media. AUSISA, working together for sustainable water and sanitation security in Africa. The Upside, taking the African perspective to fresh levels.
Million ways them flee when them buck up in a torture. Cause them I get torture.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to The Upside, Stonebwoy!
More fire.
All things that torture. That's the name of the album.
You know, torture literally means that someone who bears a torch, like a torture, like not T-U-R, but T-O-R-C-H-E-R. So like it's a Statue of Liberty holding a torch, like keeping it burning, you know what I'm saying? Like it just implies the fact that we have to inspire one another. We have to tell it through the music and reach out to the people to know that, listen, you got light inside of you that has to bend. You know what I'm saying? Like keep it burning, like don't let nobody dim your shine.
The Upside, live and real. It's dynamic. Stay ahead with Africa in Business, where Tamengubeni unpacks your go-to source for Africa's economic trends and development.
Now, the Association of Private Security Owners of South Africa, TAPSOSA, says it is concerned about the systemic criminality, corruption and gross governance failures that are crippling the private security sector provident fund. This comes after reports of alleged bribery, kickbacks, nepotism, as well as conflicts of interest orchestrated by individuals entrusted with managing that fund, which is valued between $750 and $807 million in South African rand. That equates to 13 and 14 billion rand. TAPSOSA has called on the country's Financial Sector Conduct Authority, the FSCA, to conduct an independent investigation into the fund's management and decision-making processes. For more on this, we're joined on the line by Sindiswa Changwan, who's the spokesperson of the Association of Private Security Owners of South Africa. A very good afternoon to you. Welcome to Africa in Business.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting us. We appreciate the opportunity.
So could you take us through, ma'am, the reports and the internal findings that have come out into the financial mismanagement and the regulatory neglect at the Private Security Sector Provident Fund?
So some time ago, TAPSOSA received a dossier from a reliable source that is within the Private Security Sector Provident Fund to actually raise alarm that there is serious governance failures and corruption in that Private Security Sector Provident Fund, in which there is systematic corruption, there is regulatory capture, and that fund is being looted. And it has been looted for quite a while. And within that, there are certain individuals within the fund that has been pointed to be directly colluding with service providers, that have been pointed to be colluding with the other trustees in the fund for them to be able to favor other service providers compared to the others, so that they can be able to have backhand agreements with regards to being able to run that particular fund. That fund has now become a place of looting, and it is in disarray. And as the private security employers that have got a vested interest in terms of contributing towards that particular fund, in which we are forced to contribute to for several reasons. And we are saying that there is systematic corruption and we need to be able to deal with it, because if we're not going to be dealing with it, the employees are the ones that are at the receiving end.
Maybe let's talk about that for a moment. Let's talk about the impact that this is likely to have on hundreds of thousands of South Africa's private security workers who have entrusted their retirement as well as their funeral benefits with the fund.
Exactly. That is what we had indicated. That fund has been in existence for over 2 decades. And it has accumulated so much money that where it needs to be able to go to the retirement savings of employees. But instead of that money going and the administration be efficient so that it has an impact in changing the lives of those security employees that will retire, you would find that upon retirement, security workers sometimes are left with nothing. And at the same time, also, you would find that upon retirement as well, that because of the administration, the security officers would end up not getting what they need to actually get from these particular corruption activities that are actually happening in that fund. And the governance failures in which there are companies now that are being moved from that particular fund to administer certain services that are essential, the administration of it is now being moved to the bargaining council, which has no jurisdiction with regards to the issues of being able to administer provident funds, because they are not licensed to be able to do that. There are shenanigans that have been taking place. There is a dossier in terms of the reports, in terms of monies that have been exchanging hands, and it is workers' monies that are at the core, and workers' lives and their livelihoods and their families as well.
I mean, the implications of that, as you're highlighting, are dire. But let's look at the way forward now. There have been calls for the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, the Special Investigating Unit, the Hawks, the Department of Labour to conduct investigations and also to take immediate action. What is it that you want these entities to look into, and what action should they take thereafter?
So what we are demanding, we're demanding that as a full investigation actually takes place in terms of being able to really zoom in into this corruption that is actually happening. And, there has to be some action that is taken in terms of the immediate suspension of all these questionable characters that we're actually referring to. And also what we're also looking at is that can there be accountability and recovery in terms of those trustees and executives that must be held personally liable. But most of all, there has to be some criminal prosecution. This fund was placed under administration some years ago, and some of the trustees in that fund were deemed as delinquent. The same trustees that are from the organized labor and also employers are also still sitting in that fund, doing exactly the same thing that they did some 10 years ago. And there's no consequences that is happening. We have escalated these issues and said the Department of Labor should also look into the very same bargaining council. Today there was a march that was actually taking place by unions in the private security industry, taking employers to task that there is no compliance with regards to employers. And they basically even pointed black employers, and they had indicated it's those black employers that are promoting non-compliance in the private security industry.
Cindy, so we're going to have to, ma'am, unfortunately leave it at that time. Not very much on our side, but I think very eloquently, articulated the challenges that you are facing as well as the action that you are demanding. We thank you so much for your time. That's Sindiswa Changon, spokesperson there of the Association of Private Security Owners of South Africa. One cannot underestimate the impact that this will have on the various stakeholders. As we wrap up this afternoon, we say bonjour to you, Annie Kalonji.
Bonjour Tammy, bonjour à tous les auditeurs de Channel Africa. Alors tout à l'heure sur Vue d'Afrique, il s'agira entre autres du Sénégal où les associations de presse annoncent la création d'un front commun pour la défense de la liberté de la presse après l'interpellation puis la libération de 2 journalistes. Nous parlerons également de la Côte d'Ivoire où la Commission électorale indépendante annonce l'ouverture du dépôt des candidatures pour les législatives du 27 décembre. Donc, c'est tout à l'heure sur Vue d'Afrique. Merci beaucoup, Tammy.
Merci beaucoup, Annie. And that's how we as Africa in Business come to the end of this week's broadcast. I hope you certainly have been adequately informed and stimulated with all the developments in the world of business on the African continent. For myself, Tammy Ngubeni, and the team, give yourself a splendid Friday further and an even better weekend ahead. Over now to Vue d'Afrique avec Annie Kalonji.
Vue d'Afrique, un magazine des actualités en français sur Channel Africa. Rendez-vous du lundi au vendredi